Shots fired, shots fired. Drop the gun!
The sequence of events, confirmed by San Diego authorities on Friday, presents a textbook case of a routine encounter spiraling into lethal violence. The focal point of this investigation is Alan Baker, a 54-year-old convicted felon who is currently recovering from non-fatal gunshot wounds sustained during...
Hey, stop! Oh! Fire! Shots fired, shots fired. Drop the gun!
A confrontation in the northwestern sector of Balboa Park, consistent with protocols designed to ensure impartiality and eliminate conflicts of interest. The San Diego County Sheriff's Office has assumed jurisdiction over the investigation into the use of force by San Diego Police Department personnel. To understand the trajectory of the violence, one must look at the innocuous beginning of the timeline. The incident occurred on a Tuesday afternoon, specifically around 16 hours, near the 2,900 block of Balboa Drive, situated just east of 6th Avenue and south of Spruce Street. At this juncture, the scenario was entirely mundane. Officer Kellan Taeatafa-De La Rosa, a 5-year veteran of the force, along with his partner, initiated contact with Baker. From an investigative standpoint, the initial catalyst was trivial. Baker was operating an electric bicycle, e-bike, and had reportedly committed a standard traffic infraction, likely a red light violation, improper lane usage, or a failure to adhere to local helmet regulations. The officer's intent was strictly administrative. The objective was to flag the rider down for a verbal warning, or at most, a citation. There was no initial indication that weapons would be drawn. However, the suspect's reaction indicates a premeditated unwillingness to engage with law enforcement. Upon being hailed by the patrol unit, Baker immediately initiated evasive maneuvers. The pursuit began with Baker fleeing on the e-bike, but as the terrain or circumstances shifted, he abandoned the vehicle to continue his escape on foot, leading officers on a chase through the park grounds. Lieutenant Juan Marquez of the Sheriff's Department reports that the dynamic shifted from pursuit to combat when Baker abruptly ceased his flight, pivoted toward the pursuing officers, and discharged a firearm. This escalation forced Officer Taeatafa-De La Rosa to react instantaneously to the immediate threat, returning fire and successfully neutralizing the suspect. Fortunately, the exchange of gunfire resulted in no collateral injuries to officers or bystanders. Baker survived the engagement and was transported to a medical facility for treatment of serious wounds. Consequently, the legal ramifications for Baker are severe. He now faces charges, including attempted murder of a peace officer, assault on a peace officer with a deadly weapon, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. To comprehend why a standard bicycle infraction devolved into an attempted homicide, we must look beyond the immediate circumstances and analyze the suspect's profile and mindset at the moment of contact. The forensic analysis of Alan Baker's background provides the hidden variables that turned a routine stop into a life-or-death struggle. The underlying motivation, a history of non-compliance. The primary driver behind Baker's refusal to yield was not the traffic violation itself, but the catastrophic legal consequences of identification. Baker was operating under a heavy cloak of legal liability. A background check reveals that at the time of the incident, he was the subject of 2 active felony arrest warrants issued from outside the county. These warrants, rooted in narcotics-related offenses, meant that any interaction with law enforcement resulting in an ID check would lead to immediate incarceration. In Baker's calculation, stopping for the officer was not an option. It was a guaranteed ticket back to a prison cell. The catalyst prohibited possession. The situation was further inflamed by the specific inventory on Baker's person. As a convicted felon, Baker is strictly prohibited by federal and state law from possessing firearms. Yet, he was carrying a semi-automatic pistol. This factor is critical in understanding his desperation. For a repeat offender, being caught in possession of a firearm carries severe mandatory sentencing enhancements. The combination of the outstanding drug warrants and the illegal firearm created a zero-sum psychological state. He was not merely avoiding a ticket, he was attempting to evade a compounded prison sentence that would likely span nearly a decade or more. Behavioral analysis of the pursuit. Reviewing the body-worn camera footage allows us to reconstruct the rapid degradation of Baker's decision-making process, which can be categorized into 3 distinct phases of escalation. Phase I, tactical evasion. Initially, Baker utilized the e-bike to exploit the terrain. By swerving into the park's interior, he attempted to use the density of the landscape and the maneuverability of the bicycle to break the line of sight and outpace the patrol vehicle. This was a calculated flight response. Phase 2, loss of control and panic. The dynamic shifted when the bicycle became a liability, either due to terrain difficulty or mechanical issues. Abandoning the vehicle to flee on foot down the hillside indicates a shift from calculated evasion to panic. At this stage, Officer Taeatafa-De La Rosa was closing the distance rapidly, removing the possibility of a clean escape. Phase 3, the lethal pivot. Realizing that he could not outrun the officer and that capture was imminent, Baker's fight-or-flight response collapsed into violent aggression. The footage shows a deliberate transition. He did not fire wildly to scare the officer off. Instead, he made the conscious decision to stop, acquire a target, and discharge his weapon at the pursuing officer. This was no longer an attempt to escape. It was a specific attempt to neutralize the threat posed by the officer to ensure his own freedom. Forensic conclusion on causality. The final analysis of the incident definitively rules out the initial traffic infraction as the primary antagonist. The violence was not a disproportionate reaction to a bicycle ticket. Rather, it was a calculated maneuver driven by an existential fear of incarceration. Alan Baker escalated a routine administrative stop into an attempted homicide because he carried the tangible instruments.
That's gonna happen around you, it's just like...
The resident was playing soccer in Balboa Park when his peaceful afternoon was suddenly interrupted.
Shooting the ball around, and there's a hot pursuit, I guess you'd call it, and it was a guy on an e-bike, a white guy, and the cops in tow with the sirens on. And by that time I was like, I gotta get out of here, this is crazy.
That pursuit began on Balboa Drive near Quince when 2 San Diego police officers attempted to pull over a man on a bike. It's unclear at this point
Of his own imprisonment, a concealed firearm, and active warrants. In his calculus, the officers represented not a fine, but a return to the penitentiary system. Thus, the confrontation was inevitable the moment the lights flashed. Tactical analysis, the hasty ambush. A frame-by-frame breakdown of the engagement reveals that Baker's actions transcended simple panic. He executed a hasty ambush, a military-style counterattack utilizing the environment and surprise, weaponizing terrain. Baker's deviation from the paved path was strategic. By forcing the pursuit onto a steep, grassy and traction-poor slope, he placed the pursuing officer at a kinetic disadvantage. He understood that an officer sprinting downhill in full gear would struggle with balance and deceleration, making them a vulnerable target. Target assessment. Video evidence highlights a critical micro-behavior, the checkback. Baker did not look back to navigate obstacles. His focus was locked on the officer. He was gauging the range, waiting for the officer to enter a zone of engagement close enough to ensure a hit, yet distant enough to allow Baker the split second needed to draw his weapon. The lethal pivot. The transition from flight to fight was jarringly abrupt. While moving at speed, Baker executed a rapid deceleration and a 180-degree pivot. Crucially, his hand was already priming the weapon during the turn. He did not fumble. He drew the semi-automatic pistol from his waistband or pocket with practiced fluidity and immediately leveled it at the officer's center mass. Intent to kill. The discharge of the weapon was immediate. There was no hesitation, no warning shot, and no verbal threat. Baker fired directly at the pursuer. Ballistic analysis suggests that had Officer Taeatafa-De La Rosa been a fraction of a second slower in his cognitive processing, the round would likely have struck vital organs or the head. The officer's countermeasure, ultimately, the only factor that prevented a line-of-duty death, was the officer's superior reflexive conditioning. Taeatafa-De La Rosa's ability to absorb the visual input of the gun, process the threat, and return accurate fire while under extreme physical stress speaks to high-level training. His immediate tactical response neutralized a subject who had clearly decided that killing a police officer was a veritable option to avoid arrest. The calculus of valor. Officer Taeatafa-De La Rosa's response. The distinction between recklessness and courage often lies in the outcome, but in law enforcement, it is defined by the willingness to accept a high probability of harm to effect an arrest. Officer Taeatafa-De La Rosa's actions exhibit tactical audacity, a necessary component of policing that places duty above self-preservation, the hazard of the solo pursuit. From a tactical standpoint, the officer's decision to engage in a foot pursuit presents the highest tier of risk. By separating from his partner and abandoning the hard cover of the patrol vehicle, he voluntarily entered a fatal funnel. He pursued a subject of unknown capability into an environment of dense vegetation and limited sightlines. In doing so, he effectively offered himself as a silhouette target to prevent the suspect's escape, accepting the vulnerability that comes with closing the distance on a fleeing felon, defying physics and time. The mechanics of the engagement highlight a near-impossible physical feat. As the officer sprinted downhill, his body was carrying significant forward momentum. When Baker abruptly turned to fire, the officer had to fight the laws of physics. He needed to brake against gravity, stabilize his footing on slick grass, and transition to a combat stance. Simultaneously, his cognitive processing speed was extraordinary. Within a window, likely lasting less than 1.5 seconds, he completed the entire OODA loop. Observe the weapon, orient to the threat, decide to engage, and act. He drew his service weapon, acquired a sight picture, and discharged a controlled burst of 5 rounds to suppress the threat, all while his body was still reeling from the sudden stop. Psychological resilience under fire. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this encounter was the officer's suppression of the primal flinch response. Biological instinct dictates that when a human hears a gunshot at close range, the body involuntarily recoils, freezes, or cowers. Taeatafa-De La Rosa overrode this instinct. Instead of retreating or covering his head, he leaned into the engagement, returning fire with precision. This ability to maintain fine motor skills and target acquisition while being fired upon is the hallmark of elite conditioning and a steel mindset. The geometry of death. The forensic reconstruction of the crime scene underscores just how close this incident came to tragedy. The proximity factor. The exchange of gunfire occurred at a range of merely 3 to 5 meters. In ballistics, this is considered point-blank range, where the margin for error is non-existent and the lethality of a semi-automatic handgun is maximized. Surviving a shootout at this distance is statistically an anomaly. It is a combination of divine luck and superior tactical dominance. Disadvantageous terrain. The officer was fighting from a deficit. He was moving downhill, unstable platform, and exposed, while Baker had momentarily grounded himself to deliver fire. Final case summary. This investigation serves as a stark reminder of the inherent unpredictability of patrol work. Alan Baker represents the hidden danger in every routine stop. A suspect whose desperation to hide a criminal past makes them willing to commit murder. Conversely, Officer Taeatafa-De La Rosa stands as a testament to professional valor. He ran toward a threat when survival instincts screamed to run away, and through a combination of discipline and courage, he defeated a lethal adversary in the space of a heartbeat.